Hello gardening friends and welcome back to our channel. Today we're going to learn all about soil blocking. If you look at one of my previous videos, I went over seed starting 101 using a 72 cell flat tray. Today we are going to use a 3/4 1/4" soil blocker. Now they make soil blockers in all different sizes. The 3/4 inch one is my favorite one to use because I feel like it's the most versatile. The trick to soil blocking is the back of your seed packets are going to say start 6 to 8 weeks before your last frost. As a rule of thumb, you can shave about 1/3 of that time off. So I take an average, well, let's just say it's a 6-week start time. You can take 2 weeks off of that and actually start things 4 weeks before they go out. This is great because if you miss your start date, like let's say you want to start sowing seeds, today is March the 8th, and you skip because you're really busy this weekend, and then you realize next weekend, oh my goodness, I'm a week behind, it's generally okay. There's a lot of wiggle room with these guys. Now, I like to shave about 1/3 of the time off because I don't want to have to bump these up. They make the next size, I believe, is a 1 inch or a 2 inch, and you can actually put these little blocks into the 1 or 2 inch if you need them to stay inside a little bit longer because you're still experiencing frost, but they've outgrown this. The really cool thing about seed starting with a soil block is that the roots shoot down to the bottom versus when you are planting in a flat, like I showed in my other video, roots sometimes can start to spiral and get bound. Little seedlings have a much easier time transplanting out into the garden when their roots grow straight down, so when they hit that natural soil outside, they can grow down and out. If they're already in a spiral, they're gonna have a hard time growing out and reaching and being as strong. Now, there's nothing wrong with starting in a flat like I showed you a couple videos ago. You just have to be really on top of when they get transplanted out into your garden. All right, so to jump into things, I have these small trays. These are the ones I have on hand, but you can get much larger ones. The 3/4 inch block soil starter gives you 20 little squares. It's 4 by 5. So I find that I can fit 4 of these, meaning 80 little squares onto one of these trays. A bigger cafeteria tray or a metal cookie sheet or anything like that will work too. And then of course you can fit a lot more onto them. So I have all my trays to my left, and I just took masking tape and taped a little spot on each of them. I have them preloaded, ready to go. As I'm sowing the different varieties on the trays, I can just easily take my marker, I'm not messing with tape when I have dirty hands, and just write the date that they were sown and the variety that they are. Some other supplies I have here is a marking pen. I have all my seeds. I also have my cheat sheet that I described in my Planning Your Garden video. This cheat sheet tells me exactly how much of each variety I need to start. My first variety I'm going to do today is dianthus, so carnations. So I said that I could fit 195 dianthus or carnation plants into my garden this year, which means I can sow 3 different trays of these, each of my tray holding 80 blocks. That brings me to 240. I'm going to start 240 because I want to leave room for air, like if some of them don't germinate, I make sure that I at least have 195 going into my garden. And you may say, Abby, that's 45 additional plants that you're planting. So maybe I don't actually need to create 45 additional extra plants, but it doesn't make sense for me to start multiple varieties on each sheet. So I'm just gonna go ahead and round up and say I'm doing 3 sheets, 3 trays. They each hold 80, I can plant 240, so I'm gonna do it. If I have extra, I can give them to friends, but I always wanna make sure that I have more than I need versus less than I need because I don't want to leave any gaps in my garden, giving weeds a space to grow. So the other 2 supplies I have today are this Vermont compost, Fort V, and this Jiffy seed starting mix. This doesn't matter what brand it is, any seed starting mix will do. I take about 60% seed starting mix and 40% of this Fort V, and I mix it together in my tub, and I put lots and lots of water in it. You can get Fort V at a lot of online retailers. Maybe check out your local nursery and you can find it there. It is expensive, but these are the only 2 ingredients you need for soil blocking. If you look up soil blocking recipes online, you will find lots of different things, and you can make your own, that's fine. But this Fort V is composed of mature compost, peat moss, granite, coconut, vermiculite, fertilizer listed below. So it already has a lot of those ingredients mixed in. I like it because all I have to do is mix it with the seed starting mix and I'm ready to go. If you're doing bigger blocks than the 3/4 inch block, like let's say you're doing a 1 or a 2 inch block, this may be the only ingredient you need and you won't need to mix it with the seed starting soil. But I mix my small 3/4 inch blocker with seed starting soil to help make it a tighter fit. This compost can be just a little bit clumpy, and you don't want any air gaps or holes when you're making your soil blocks with the 3/4 inch. Last ingredient I have here is vermiculite. It's just a fine grade vermiculite. I dust the top of my soil blocks with this after I've sown all my seeds. All right, so let's jump into it. I mixed 60% of my seed starting mix and 40% of my Fort V mix and a lot of water. This is the consistency that I have, and it may be kind of hard to see, but when I squeeze it, water drips out. It's very wet. You don't want it to be runny, but when you squish, I hold it here at the bar, when you squish this down into this mix, you want to see water coming out the top of your soil blocker. I also keep an extra, I just have a Amazon box here filled with Fort V and seed starting soil. In case this is too wet, I can easily just add more dry to kind of like get the right ratio. But and then you scrape the bottom to make it nice and flat. You want to make sure that all 20 cells are compact with this mix. And I think mine are. So then I'm going to go ahead and press it down onto my tray. And it came out perfect. Now let's say I see one that had an air pocket in it and it didn't make the best soil block. I would just scoop that entire soil block up, put it back in here and try again. You really want to make sure that you're maximizing all 20 squares so you have really tight soil blocks. So when you go to water them, they're not crumbling apart or anything like that. That brings me to my next point. If your mix is too wet and soupy and you go to drop it, you're going to see kind of like the edges of the soil blocks start to like fall apart and kind of landslide out onto your tray. You do not want that. That means your mix is too wet. On the contrary, if your mix is too dry, it's not going to form good soil block shape either. You're gonna go ahead and eject it and it's gonna kind of crumble away right away too because it's too dry. The other problem with this is when you go to water them for the first time, they're definitely gonna lose their form because they're gonna absorb water and just kind of get real mushy. So it is important that you have the right water ratio going on, but it's not hard. If it's too watery, you just add some more. If it's too dry, you just add some more water. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this tray made and then we are going to start sowing some seeds. I think they say to press it 4 times down. I kind of play with it as I go. All right, so here I have 4 soil blocks fitting on this tiny tray and it's holding 80 cells so I can start 80 plants. Okay, today I'm sowing 3 different types of carnations or dianthus, so I'm going to do a tray of each, 80 seeds of each. Depending on what you're seed starting, you're gonna wanna get a little dish. I have a little ramekin. You can use a lid or anything like that. I like to use, if my variety is pretty small, this one I could, carnations I could easily use my finger, but I'm gonna use a toothpick. And I just wet it a little bit and then I dab it on my seed to make sure that I'm being really precise in getting 1 seed per cell. The great thing about the soil blocker is it has a little dimple, so it already makes a little concave portion of the block that you can set your seed into. I personally really love carnations. I feel like they're making an awesome comeback. You can get them in really muted tones. Oftentimes we think of them in really bright, colorful vintage tones that you see in the grocery store. Carnations were my grandmother's favorite flower, so every time I see them or plant them, I always think of her. My little carnation patch, dedicated to my Grandma Margaret. She loved this simple flower. I'm always kind of envious when people tell me they have a favorite flower. Because when people ask me that question, I feel like it just depends on the day of the week. I have so many favorites. I can never pick. I really like snapdragons, bells of Ireland. I love cosmos. And not just the flower, but the whole plant. I feel like it dances. It's very wispy, full plant that just moves in the wind. So if you look at my other seed starting video, when I started in these 72 flats, it was the same size as my heat mat. I think I can fit about 4 of these trays on my heat mat, and so that flat it held 72 plants. This tiny one holds 80, so it's definitely a space saver and material saver. So 80 times 4, 320 plants I can fit on a heat mat. So when you're first starting out, you might not get into soil blocking, but the more you start to grow, you're better off converting. All right, the last step before I go move these to the heat mat is to add my fine vermiculite over top. Some varieties say do not cover, in which case I probably would just do a very, very fine dusting. But instead of like pushing the seed even further into the soil block, I just laid it on top of the divot that was made by the soil blocker, and I pretty generously covered the tops of these. All right, here are 80 carnation seeds that are planted and ready to go. I have my heat mats here. I can easily fit 3 of those trays, maybe even a 4th. On it, and then I'm going to go ahead and cover them with burlap. I have a lot more seed starting to do, so I'm going to leave them uncovered for now. When it is time to water these, you are really going to have to babysit them. So as you can see, there's not a ton of space. You're going to want to get a really skinny water spout watering can to add water into this perimeter gap. You can also take a disposable water bottle, pour it really slowly in, or even cut like a generous hole in the top of a cap of a disposable water bottle and squirt some water in here. You're gonna wanna squirt water in and make sure that all of the bottoms of it get nice and wet, like not just one corner of your tray, but all 4. You're gonna sit there and you're gonna watch it wick up the water. And if you have excess remaining water after a few minutes left in your tray, you're gonna ever so carefully tilt it out. You do not want these sitting in water. So then you're gonna put them on your heat mat, cover them with your burlap, and wait for them to germinate. As soon as they germinate, you're going to pop them down under the light and let them grow. All right, so as you can see, we got about another 960 plants sown today. A little close up. These are all of our 3/4 inch soil blockers. So I'm going to wrap it up with our soil blocking tutorial. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments below. As always, like, share, subscribe, and we look forward to connecting with you. Stick around for our next video soon.